At the start of the tale, there's a young guy named Chan who sells steamed buns near the high school every day. One day, a grandma and her granddaughter, Susan, bought buns from Chan. It became clear that Chan was smitten with Susan at first glance. The grandma got irritated with Chan for continuously gazing at her granddaughter. From that moment, Chan made it a routine to catch glimpses of Susan in the neighborhood where she attended school. One night, Chan accidentally spotted the grandma searching for Susan since she hadn't returned home since noon. Upon learning this, Chan took the initiative to search the village for her. After a thorough search, he eventually found Susan, who had gotten lost near the hill. Chan promptly brought her back to her grandma. It turned out that Susan had a mental disability, causing her to often forget her way home and behave a bit unusually. However, Chan's affection for her remained unaffected, as his love for Susan was genuine. After several days of not seeing Susan and her grandma, Chan grew curious about their whereabouts. Upon finishing his sales, he decided to visit Susan's house. To his surprise, a crowd, including the police and social services, had gathered in front of Susan's house. It was revealed that Susan's grandmother had passed away 3 days ago, and Susan was found lying next to her lifeless body. Concerns about Susan's deteriorating mental state arose, leading authorities to consider admitting her to a mental hospital. Later that evening, Chan clandestinely visited the hospital where Susan was being treated. Fortunately, Susan's room was situated at the hospital's rear, allowing Chan to easily spirit her away. He took Susan to a playground in an attempt to calm her down. During this time, it became evident that Susan also harbored feelings for Chan. Once Susan had calmed, Chan drove her back to her apartment. Unfortunately, upon arrival, they discovered that the police still had the apartment locked. As Chan contemplated breaking in, a neighbor from Susan's apartment emerged. This neighbor, feeling compassion for Susan, swiftly invited her into her own room. Inside, the neighbor informed them that she would be away for a few days, and offered Susan and Chan the opportunity to stay in her apartment during her absence. It turns out that the woman was a prostitute who often wandered off. She even allowed Chan to do whatever he wanted. After she left, Chan accidentally saw Susan taking a bath, but he didn't think anything dirty. Instead, he chose to go out to look for food around the apartment. However, the situation took a brutal turn mere minutes after Chan departed. Susan, having just finished a bath, heard an unexpected knock on the door. Assuming it was Chan, she hastily opened it, only to find a stranger named David on the other side. Without invitation, David barged in and assumed Susan was a new associate, prompting him to demand money, mistaking her for a prostitute working under the woman who had left. Quickly revealing his perverse intentions, David frightened Susan, who appeared visibly shaken. Luckily, Chan, positioned across the street, had spotted David through the apartment window. Chan rushed back and immediately confronted David, engaging in a fierce altercation that culminated in Chan subduing him. Eventually, Chan and Susan managed to flee the apartment, resolving to report David's actions to the local police. Upon their arrival, they encountered Deputy Chief Jeffo, who instructed Chan to a separate room while planning to interrogate Susan. An experienced officer, aware of Susan's mental condition, advised against pressing her further. However, Jeffo and his team proceeded with questioning Susan about the assailant's description. Susan mentioned a distinct detail, a man bearing a star tattoo on his right hand. To their dismay, they realized the identified culprit was none other than David, their own police chief and superior. Meanwhile, David, who had overheard Susan's revelation at the station, summoned his subordinates, including Jeffo, asserting that he mistook Susan for a woman involved in illicit activities and attempted to discipline her. However, facing the reality of his actions, David abruptly silenced everyone and attempted to shift blame onto Chan, accusing him falsely. After a brief interval, David's men intensified their interrogation of Chan. Sensing the danger and recognizing the police's intentions to frame him, Chan spotted a photo of David on a nearby table, realizing the trap set against him. In a swift attempt to escape with Susan, Chan's efforts were thwarted, leading to his capture and subsequent torture. To make matters worse, the police officers did the unthinkable to Susan in turns, right in front of Chan's eyes. They seemed very satisfied with what they had done. Following the incident, the officers fabricated a narrative, claiming that Chan had forcibly taken hold of a police firearm, making it seem as though the gun was inextricably linked to Chan, now unconscious. Meanwhile, Susan faced threats, warned against speaking out. The authorities vowed to harm Chan if she dared to expose the truth. During the trial, The police officers testified falsely as part of their premeditated scheme. Eventually, Chan found himself sentenced to 6 months in prison, accused of assaulting law enforcement during his incarceration period. After his release from prison, Chan was observed attempting to remove his fingerprints, hinting at a plan he had in mind for the future. Fast forward 6 months, Chan was finally free from incarceration. As he prepared to leave, anticipating a reunion with Susan, he was overcome with emotion upon seeing her. Sadly, Chan discovered that Susan was now pregnant, a consequence of the traumatic events inflicted by the police officers. The situation weighed heavily on both Chan and Susan, evoking deep distress that anyone would empathize with if placed in their circumstances. Susan was putting on a smile, attempting to help Chan move past the difficult days they had recently faced. They both seemed a bit happier now that they were reunited. However, the haunting memory of the grudge lingered in Chan's heart, and he was determined to seek vengeance for the police officers. Meanwhile, a pregnant woman, identified as the wife of one of the officers named David, was seen shopping. Once she finished shopping, the pregnant woman hurried back home. Shortly afterward, her husband Ting Zai also arrived home and tried calling her. However, at that moment, she was unexpectedly assaulted from behind by Chan. Days later, a police diving team stumbled upon a plastic bag, emitting a strong, unpleasant odor. Based on reports from locals, the bag was brought to the police station for examination. When it was opened, the authorities were horrified to discover a mutilated fetus inside. Additionally, the police found Ting Zai's identification card among the belongings in the bag. Realizing this alarming connection, they promptly rushed to Ting Zai's residence. Upon reaching Ting Zai's residence, the police couldn't locate him initially. Soon after, they were startled once more by the discovery of Ting Zai's deceased wife, her body in an advanced state of decomposition, and notably, missing the fetus. This revelation indicated that the fetus found in the river belonged to Ting Zai's wife. Simultaneously, the scene shifted to an elderly policeman who had recently returned from a trip with his young pregnant wife. Shockingly, this older officer was part of the group responsible for assaulting Susan. While the elderly policeman went to fetch some drinks, he was startled upon seeing his wife gazing out of the window. Around 30 minutes later, the old policeman attempted to contact one of his colleagues. However, when the call was answered, the policeman remained silent, leading the recipient to suspect that something was amiss within a short span of time. The colleagues of the elderly policeman arrived at his home only to be shocked by a grim sight. The elderly policeman's wife lay dead with her abdomen cut open, mirroring the earlier case. To their horror, they discovered the lifeless body of the elderly policeman in the hot tub. Jeffo, in the midst of this scene, began suspecting that Chan might be behind these horrifying incidents, seeking vengeance against them. Subsequently, news about the series of killings targeting police officers circulated widely on national television. Law enforcement initiated a thorough search for the culprit, monitoring all vehicles entering and leaving the city. As fate would have it, the bus carrying Chan was intercepted by the authorities. Sensing Jeffo's growing suspicion towards him, Chan, gripped by fear, opted to flee discreetly. Unfortunately for Chan, his attempt at escape was short-lived as Jeffo caught up to him, sparking a chase. Eventually, Chan was apprehended and brought into an interrogation room. Chan endured torture from Jeffo and one of Jeffo's associates in a bid to extract a confession regarding the crimes committed against their fellow officers. Despite the torment, Chan maintained his silence, refusing to admit to anything. Frustrated by Chan's persistent silence, Jeffo contemplated shooting Chan in the head. However, Chan remained resolute in not divulging any information. Meanwhile, Susan was at home when she inadvertently caught the news on TV reporting Chan's arrest on charges of murdering police officers and his family. This news deeply disappointed Susan, as it implied she would once again be separated from her beloved. Later, Susan contacted the police for some undisclosed reason, but abruptly ended the call. Subsequently, Susan proceeded to the bathroom with a clear intention: to terminate her own pregnancy using a knife. Afterward, she was observed discarding the knife into the water. A few minutes later, the scene shifted back to the police station, where Jeffo seemed determined to conclude Chan's situation decisively. Suddenly, a police captain from the headquarters approached Jeffo, visibly upset. The captain conveyed that Jeffo had apprehended the wrong individual because the actual serial killer had just committed a crime against a pregnant woman, Susan. This revelation implied that Susan had purposely orchestrated these events to exonerate Chan from all charges, Subsequently, the captain believed that Jeffo and his team had violated regulations and promptly suspended them. Following this, the captain questioned Chan about his escape from the bus during the police raid. Chan responded, stating that it wasn't the first time he had been falsely accused by law enforcement officers. Upon learning of the lack of evidence and considering Chan's statement, he was finally acquitted of all charges. However, Jeffo's team suggested revealing the truth to the police captain about Chan's grudge against them stemming from past incidents. Yet Jeffo adamantly refused, seeing it as a blow to their own pride. Instead, they attempted to reach out to David, the retired police chief. Jeffo briefed David on their plan to swiftly neutralize Chan and Susan. Meanwhile, Chan intended to whisk Susan away from the hospital before any police action could be taken against them. However, just as Chan and Susan were about to depart, Jeffo apprehended them, initiating a chase. Simultaneously, Jeff's men were instructed to intercept the ambulance that Chan was attempting to use for their escape. Once, Jeff's crew located Chan's car and promptly fired shots at him, causing the car to collide with a small gas station. A brawl erupted between the two. Soon after, Jeff himself arrived and aimed to ram his car into Chan. Luckily, Chan evaded the collision, sparking another chase. Eventually, Chan was apprehended and ruthlessly assaulted by Jeff, pinning him down. In a desperate moment, Chan stumbled upon an iron plate and used it to fight back fiercely, leading to Jeff's severe injury. Sadly, Chan succumbed to his injuries the following day. The next scene unfolded with David, the retired ex-police chief, discovering Susan in an ambulance. Reacting impulsively, David shot the motionless Susan. He then attempted to provoke Chan by firing his gun into the air, triggering the sound of gunfire. After apparently passing out the previous night, Chan abruptly regained consciousness, struggling to approach David, who was determined to end it all then and there. David aimed to swiftly eliminate Chan with his gun until he exhausted all his bullets. He mentioned that if Chan managed to survive, he should meet him later. The storyline jumps 5 years ahead. David is depicted daydreaming, haunted by guilt for his actions against Susan and Chan. He now resides in another city, dedicating himself to teaching at a school. Additionally, he frequently appears on national TV as a religious figure and charity worker. Meanwhile, Chan, still alive, accidentally catches a TV broadcast featuring David. Learning David's whereabouts, Chan decides to settle his lingering grudge. Before confronting David, Chan shaves his head, resembling his appearance from before. In a brief encounter, Chan finds David teaching children to play the piano. David, upon noticing Chan, attempts to reconcile over coffee, urging forgiveness for his past errors. However, consumed by a 5-year-old grudge, Chan remorselessly ends David's life then and there. The movie concludes with Chan continuing his life alongside Susan, who surprisingly survives despite being confined to a wheelchair due to David's past actions. The final scene marks the end of the film,